This is a Relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
So how bad was this Chinese interference, this foreign interference in one of Canada's most recent federal elections, 2019 federal election in particular? Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, testifying just hours before we're doing this show. We're going to get into that story that I know a lot of Canadians are paying attention to, and probably to varying degrees. If you're friendly with this government, if you're a supporter of this government, you're going, well, they probably took all the information they had and considered it and moved on. The Prime Minister telling the Inquiry just a number of hours ago that he challenged some of the information that CSIS, Canada's spy agency, had presented him with. If you're very critical of this government, if your team lost the 2019 election, you may have an entirely different take on that. We're going to get into it with political writer Evan Scrimshaw in this episode of Real Talk. This is a guy, you know Evan, he's been on the show before. Scrimshaw Unscripted is his Substack. Thousands of people subscribe to it, and the guy's not afraid to call a spade a spade. He certainly puts his thoughts out there, oftentimes in profane fashion. This might be an episode for the kids to have the earmuffs on, Johnny. By the way, he's got no time for Naheed Nenshi's Alberta NDP leadership campaign.
Really?
He's I can't remember the word he used, not self-absorbed. We'll get into it with Evan in just a little bit, but he doesn't think that Nenshi's doing it just like The Bachelor, The Bachelorette on ABC. He doesn't think he's doing it for the right reasons. He's not doing it for the right reasons. So we'll get into that. We'll talk about Anthony Housefather. Remember, we got into that a while ago. Anthony Housefather, obviously of Jewish heritage, saying he wasn't sure how he felt, his future with the Liberal Party after a certain vote. Remember that in the House of Commons, that Heather McPherson vote that the Liberals had supported. And remember we talked about it a while ago, and Anthony Housefather was basically like, I don't know if I'm sticking around, pretty candid to reporters. Well, he says after a period of serious reflection, he's got his plan in place, and Evan's been writing about that as well, so we'll get into it. And as we love to do on this show, because stories and conversations evolve over days or weeks or what have you, I was talking about this Evening of Hope that I'm hosting Saturday, April 20th in Fort Saskatchewan for the Andy Polanski Charitable Foundation. Andy passed away tragically in a motor vehicle accident some time ago, but in his memory, and because he was an organ donor, and because his selfless gift of organ donation, the commitment made before he knew when his end would come, because that preserved and protected life for 5 other people, his friends and the founders of the Andy Polanski Charitable Foundation are now helping organ donor families. They say that there's not enough supports in Canada for organ donor families. So we had this email, if you listen to our April 10th episode of Real Talk, from Leslie in Northwest Territories, shout out to the NWT, and she was talking about her son and his fiance and their organ donation journey. Yeah. And you have to listen to that. It's in our April 10th episode. Well, it prompted another email from Jim in Vernon, BC, and another email from AJ. And so I want to get into those as well, because it seems like this is an issue that's resonating with Canadians. But can we both agree? I won't put words in your mouth. I know for me, we don't talk about it enough.
I don't think we do at all. Yeah.
I don't even know if any of my best friends are organ donors. No. I should know that. Yeah. Right? And that's something that should be kind of a normalized part of conversation. And you might sit there and go, wow, I mean, it's not really, I don't need a heart transplant. I don't need a lung. Like, you don't know. You might. And you might also save somebody else's life. So anyway, these are real life, first person, as real as it gets type emails from Jim and Vernon and from AJ. So we're going to get to those before this show is out. Really looking forward to it, and we're grateful that you're here with us. The show would not be happening without the presenting sponsorship today from Business Career College. If you're looking for a rewarding and high-paying career, but you don't have a university degree, maybe in past that might have stood in your way. Maybe you've perceived that that's been standing in your way, but you don't need a post-secondary degree to get started as an insurance professional with Business Career College. And in Canada, insurance agents are making great salaries, like quickly into the 6 figures, and all they've done to get there, a lot of them, is take an approved course and pass a licensing exam. Okay? And Business Career College offers industry-leading approved courses in life insurance, property and casualty insurance, plus They're expert instructors passionate about helping you launch your new career. And here's another cool angle on this. Because you're hearing about this, seeing it on Real Talk, you're going to save 15% on any BCC insurance course, any course with the code Real Talk. That's the promo code Real Talk, all one word, when you get started today at businesscareercollege.com. Evan Scrimshaw is a political writer. You may have read his work. You likely have. Scrimshaw Unscripted is his Substack. He's a wildly entertaining follow on Twitter. Although, Evan, you do break one of the rules. You break one of the rules when it comes to people that I'll engage with on Twitter, and that is that you don't use your real photo in your profile. Now, luckily, you're using number 29, Leon Draisaitl, instead, so we're going to give you a pass on this one. It's nice to have you back on Real Talk, pal.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
and I mean, I'm just not as handsome as Leon, so I have to rock with the better profile picture.
Buddy, who is as handsome as Leon? Nobody is. You write about federal politics for the most part. You cover a lot of provincial politics in Ontario. You write about British Columbia. You write a lot about Alberta, and so we're going to kind of jump across the country. But why don't we lead with the story that's leading the national news headlines on the day that we're recording this episode of Real Talk? CSIS says, Canada's spy agency, that it saw low-level Chinese meddling in the 2019 election. This is what this inquiry has heard. The Prime Minister has his own take on it, but what's been jumping out at you to this point in that inquiry?
How much of it's rehashed? I mean, the big stories that have gotten headlines in the days before have been CSIS documents that have been tabled that people, either Bob Fife and Stephen Chase or Sam Cooper, reported on a year ago. It's been a lot of things that we've known, or at least suspected. It's been a lot of things that are sort of scary sounding, but not necessarily just positive. And it's a lot of things that don't add up to much of a clear picture. Like, the Liberals won, 36 more seats than the Conservatives in 2019, and they won 41 more seats than them in 2021. The notion that Chinese interference is what swung the result in any meaningful way is, of course, nonsense. Aaron O'Toole, in his most self-serving estimate, is that Chinese interference in 2021 might have cost them 9 seats. Like, it's an important issue. I'm glad we're having the inquiry. I think David Johnston is not exactly coming out looking like roses right now.
Former Governor General,
former Governor General, the special rapporteur, or whatever the title was, who gave a nothing to see or hear report in the spring. Not looking like roses with some of the parts of what has come out, but like a lot of this is rehashed. A lot of the big, juicy, salacious stuff, it's just rehashed Sam Cooper allegations from the spring that have the exact same problems that they had when I wrote about it all year and 13 months ago.
You're talking about Global News investigative journalist Sam Cooper, right? Who's
former Global reporter.
Yeah. Why don't we get into that? Because he kind of got nailed to the cross a little bit for a lot of this. A lot of people have had questions around the motivation behind his reporting, his sources, and the like. Is that anything that you've taken a look at?
Oh yeah, for sure. His stories just do not pass basic journalistic muster, and I can't believe that a reputable news organization published them. Like, straight up, they are full of not even just inaccuracies, but they are full of bad arguments that do not hold water. Han Dong is allegedly a person of interest and suspicious that he entered the Don Valley North nomination contest, despite the fact that he was an MPP from Toronto who moved to a different part of Toronto to advance his political career when he lost provincially when Kathleen Wynne took the Ontario Liberals from government to third place. Like, publishing unvetted CSIS claims as factual when there's no basis in the documents. Now that the documents have been tabled, we can see there's no proof attached to them. There's no great evidence. It's just supposition from some people at CSIS. And Justin Trudeau, people at CSIS told Justin Trudeau, or told a senior Liberal who then told Justin Trudeau that, CSIS thinks they should get rid of Han Dong. That's a story, but I think the bigger story is that why is CSIS telling any political party what candidates they can and can't elect, as opposed to the story being, Justin Trudeau is somehow, betraying us by letting a security risk in. It's bad journalism on shaky foundations that is repeated ad nauseum because it makes the Prime Minister look bad. But if this were a liberal hack with these same allegations about Stephen Harper, I'd be equally as outraged because there's no there. There's no smoking gun.
So how can the Conservatives, or how do the Conservatives leverage this? You have to acknowledge, obviously, that there's political potential here, whether or not there's some damning result of this inquiry, whether or not the Prime Minister steps down as a result of this, which he's quite obviously not going to do. Where does this go, and what do you do with it if you're Pierre Poilievre?
I mean, if you're Poilievre, you just keep repeating the fact that Beijing wanted Justin Trudeau to win the 2021 election. That's the pull quote. And like that was reported by Bob Fife in February of 2023. That's been confirmed at this point. Aaron O'Toole took a much more hawkish line on China in 2021 than Andrew Scheer had taken in 2019. The Chinese government actively wanted a Trudeau government at that election. That's a pretty damning thing. That's a pretty damning indictment on Canadian-China relations. I think in a country where opinions about the CCP and the government of China are not high, Justin Trudeau is the preferred Prime Minister of China is a pretty good talking point for Poilievre. But, at the end of the day, Poilievre has way more effective talking points. He's got cost of living, he's got housing, he's got carbon tax. Like, honestly, call him weak on China. Try and make the Winnipeg lab thing a big story. And honestly, I would just kind of let this go for a while. And frankly, I'd just get back to his better issues.
Sylvia says people need to understand that intelligence is not evidence. Sylvia's in our live chat. Seventh Pilot says this could have been minor, maybe, but to simply dismiss it because it didn't affect the outcome of the election is ludicrous. You also have to wonder what this does to the average Canadian's confidence in an upcoming federal election, or any election in Canada for that matter. It'll make people wonder about the validity. I mean, I understand that's a big word to invoke, but the validity of the outcome of the American election coming up in November. If people start to really, truly understand what some of the global players like China and Russia are capable of and are doing, and the power that they may have on social media or otherwise, or even on the ground. I mean, this Don Valley North thing, getting international students to allegedly to show up at voting stations with false documents, that type of thing. Whether or not this is ultimately vetted and confirmed as accurate, the fact that these seeds are being planted in people's minds, the electorate's minds, that people are hearing talk about it on shows like this, but also hearing talk about it in their workplaces and from their friends, and people are just reading the headlines. Ultimately, you do have a bigger problem as a society if people continue to lose their faith in democracy. Can we agree there?
Oh, for sure. And that's why I wrote a column when David Johnston resigned, stepped down, whatever, as rapporteur, which is that we did need an inquiry at that point, because I do want our elections to be secure, and I want them to be both sort of technically secure, but I also want there to be public confidence in them. I don't want what's happening in America to happen here. I don't want either side of the political aisle to start fomenting this sort of nonsense. There's a strand of sort of poll denialism going on amongst Liberal supporters, and I keep writing about it and I keep attacking people for it, because no, Justin Trudeau is deeply unpopular. Just because he's popular with your friend group or your support system or your family or whatever doesn't change the fact that he is deeply unpopular. And I don't want a situation where elections are only legitimate if your side wins, because at the end of the day, I'm a small liberal. I'm a progressive guy. Like, I'm probably more left wing than a lot of people listening to the show right now. If Pierre Poilievre wins to be a perfectly legitimate prime minister, he'll make decisions that I don't agree with. But if decisions that I don't agree with make you illegitimate, like, that's not how this works. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose in a democracy. And I desperately don't want a situation where we start treating elections as legitimate only if they come out with an outcome that I want.
Arsh leaves a good point in our live chat on YouTube, says you guys are leaving out interference by Modi's Indian government. The Guardian reporting on that just last week. India and Pakistan trying to meddle in Canada's elections. So says CSIS. Noob Try Again in the chat says, listen, guys, I'm more concerned about election interference moving forward than in the past. Foreign actors are exerting influence, even if minimal. This must not continue. What's government going to do in future? What's the onus on the federal government right now?
Well, I think the reason you have to look backwards is to figure out what they did, right?
It's relevant, obviously.
Real. Yeah, you have to figure out what's real. You have to figure out what's overblown, and then you have to plug the holes, right? On some level, we are always playing whack-a-mole because we don't know what the new next frontier is going to be. But I would love if if you could get the top sort of security people in a room with Poilievre, Trudeau, Jagmeet, all of them, and just talk about what needs to be fixed. I'm sure there are 1,000 things that could be fixed in election law, in advertising law, in securities law to make some of these things harder to do. There should be a conversation probably about whether or not international students and permanent residents should be able to vote in party leadership races. Maybe. I don't know what the outcome of that conversation is, but that's part of the game, is selling nominations to university students. I've worked a nomination battle in Ottawa Vanier, like a heavily student area. That's the game as it's currently constituted. And so we have to have a lot of conversation, and that's why the inquiry is important. Not because it might, help Pierre Poilievre in the polls, although not that he really needs the help right now, but because I want genuinely to know what the issues are, what the flaws are, and then I really, really hope that the Liberals get this through in time to make it so that it's substantially harder. We know the Russians are going to try. We know the Chinese are going to try. I don't exactly have high, exactly the greatest things to say about Modi, but we got to make it harder for these people to influence it. And I hope that this inquiry is robust and delivers a sort of tangible list of, here are 12 things or 18 things or 22 things that we should do that will all make our elections more secure and more legitimate moving forward.
I like that you just sort of like plant your flag and you go, I'm probably more left wing than a lot of the people that listen to this podcast, listen to this talk show. One of the things that we're really proud of, Evan, on this show is that we've got like people on the far left and we've got right wingers that listen to this, and a lot of times they'll congregate and debate and dance in our live chat. We get emails across the political spectrum, which I love. I don't typically ask guests like which way they vote or whether or not they hold party memberships. But when you characterize yourself as left wing, and then you mentioned the polls, I just have to ask: Are you a Jagmeet Singh guy? Are you a federal Green Party guy? Are you a Trudeau guy? And once you've divulged, if you care to, let us know what you make of the jostling and what we're seeing right now, which suggests that the Liberals, as I said to the Prime Minister February 21st, are bound for a bloodbath. Pierre Poilievre is going to form a massive majority, and Jagmeet Singh is essentially seen as irrelevant, even within his own party. No growth there. How do you assess my assessment?
Your assessment's entirely correct on the current state of play. Obviously, there's a decent amount of time before we think the next election is going to be. I'm a liberal-minded guy. I voted Green in 2019 out of protest over SNC, and I voted NDP in 2021 in protest over We. But I'm probably going to vote for Trudeau next time. I'm deeply disappointed in Singh. He is honestly probably my most used punching bag on the site these days because his leadership's a failure. The NDP doesn't know what it stands for. They just lost 3 MPs last week because, 3 competent, smart people who know what they're doing are just like, we're done with this guy. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's a joke. And I mean, in theory, things could get better, right? The economy could be better in October of 2025 than it is now. Maybe that massive majority gets cut down to a slim majority. The outsidiest of outside chances that the Liberals recover enough to turn majority government for Poilievre into minority government. But no, as of right now, the polls are a bloodbath. Abacus came out this morning with a 20-point lead. The polls are so bad for the Liberals that I don't even care to check the provincial results anymore. I don't even care to dig into them because it's okay, a conservative landslide, move on. If it tightens, I'll get interested in the details again, but there's no point getting interested in the details because whether Poilievre wins 220 seats or 230 or 240, it's just not the world. It's not the world's most interesting question to me.
Yeah. So you're a guy whose vote is up for grabs though. And you're a guy that you've told that you're a protest voter, which is always interesting. I like picking the brains of those folks because you're not going to like the word, susceptible to influence in the presentation of scandal, as an example. You remember, you recall, you tell us your 2019 vote was influenced by SNC-Lavalin. Your 2021 vote was influenced by the We Charity flare-up. I don't know if it's a scandal, but it certainly served as one. It lost them some votes, yours included. You know, a protest voter is wired a little bit differently than maybe the average partisan supporter.
For sure. And like at the end of the day, I only have so much ability to influence the Liberal Party. And I mean, now I have a little bit more because I have my site and people read it. But like at the end of the day, I can't vote for a political party. Like the Liberal intransigence on ethics is their greatest flaw, right? Their hubris, their arrogance is the thing that takes down Liberal governments. It took down Pierre Trudeau. It took down Chrétien Martin, obviously, with that scam. And it nearly took out the Liberals in 2019. I mean, that election had no business being, you know, a tied race in an election year before the Liberals sort of pulled it back in the end. But like, I want to hold the left to a standard, right? Because part of what happens and part of why the right is so wonky in the US is that you make compromises to win an election. You then back in the guy because he's your guy, and then you never hold them to any standards. And then you wonder why your movement is depleted intellectually, morally. And like, I don't want that to happen to the Canadian left. The Canadian left are probably going to lose the next election. Overwhelmingly likely to do so, sure. But I don't want them to lose going down in a sort of flame of inglory, right? I don't want them to go down pretending like the polls are wonky or that Pierre Poilievre is a legitimate prime minister or a legitimate conservative leader. Like, I believe in holding people who agree with me to account. And I think that too many people don't hold their ideological allies to account because it's harder to do than to just write sanctimonious screeds about how bad the other side are.
We're talking to Evan Scrimshaw. You can read his work at scrimshawunscripted.substack.com. You can follow him on Twitter at @escrimshaw. Evan, hang tight, and obviously we'll put those links into the show notes on the podcast and on YouTube. We want to talk about Anthony Housefather. I want to talk about Naheed Nenshi when we come back, and I'll ask Evan his thoughts on what Justin Trudeau is going to do about the carbon tax. You can now, as we talked about with Jen Gerson earlier this week, up that number of Canadian premiers requesting meetings with the PM on the carbon tax. It's now 6 across the country, including now the Maritimes. And so how big of a problem is this for the Prime Minister? What does he do with it? We'll ask Evan. Johnny, I was lucky enough last night to be able to walk the halls of the new Friesen Brothers in West Edmonton in Glenora. This is the one that's opening up on April 12th.
Yeah.
Okay, that's coming up tomorrow. If you're listening to this show the day we're doing it, April 12th, Friesen Brothers Glenora. That's their 17th store, and it was all hands on deck there yesterday at the sort of the sneak peek celebration, including all 3 brothers. You had Doug, Mike, and Kenny Loveson. That's the second generation of ownership. Of course, Frank Loveson started Friesen Brothers coming up almost 75 years ago, still family owned. I want to tell you about one thing and one thing only today. What? This is a first in their Glenora store. They have dry aging coolers.
Are you
They
kidding
have
me?
not had this in any Friesen Brothers before. They told me this. The temperature is held steady at 1.6 degrees Celsius.
Wow.
They keep the humidity at 80%,
Nice.
which means they can dry age beef. They're going to dry age beef up to 90 days, dude.
Can they de-age me?
They cannot de-age.
Okay.
I never asked them that question. The de-aging cooler. Oh my gosh. That'll be in Friesen Brothers location number 18. But for now, you can dry age your beef. You can pick it up. They'll have it aged 20 days, 30 days, 40, whatever they're going to do. It's going to be a cool thing to check in on. The butcher shop is just one of the things that's going to make this store an absolute game changer when it comes to buying food in the West End of Edmonton. Friesen Brothers opening April 12th. Our friends at California Closets want to remind you that their consultations are always free. Okay, so yeah, you're thinking of installing an entirely new entertainment center. You've seen the spots on Real Talk. You've heard me talking about what a huge and wonderful investment it was for us in our home, the difference it made in our quality of life in our house, in the value of our home, in the impression it makes when people visit. But of course, I know a lot of you are going, I don't know if we can afford it right now. I don't know if it's part of the budget. Let their team surprise you. Get some actual plans in place. Talk to them. No cost there. And figure out what you can do. They did our project on budget, and it has stood the test of time. Almost 10 years ago now, we still love our California closets. And before we talk about carbon taxes, before we talk about the environment, Canada's energy industry, we'll get back to that with Evan Scrimshaw in just a little bit. We all know that emissions are an issue, and in particular out of Canada's oil sands. Well, the 6 largest producers in Canada's oil sands know that as well. And that's why Pathways Alliance is working with governments on a proposed carbon capture and storage network for Canada's oil sands. Global energy demands are changing, and that's why Canada's largest oil sands companies, the 6 of them, want to be offering the world responsibly produced oil. They're planning to build a large-scale carbon capture and storage network that'll reduce emissions from operations and protect existing jobs, create new jobs as well. Responsibly produced energy is what the world wants. It's what Alberta can provide. You can learn more at pathwaysalliance.ca. Well, it wasn't too long ago that Anthony Housefather, the Montreal MP, was weighing his future with the Liberal Party. He's long been associated with the party. He's certainly been a prominent player under Justin Trudeau, but after just 2 of his fellow MPs voted against an NDP motion calling for a recognition of Palestinian statehood, Housefather had this to say to reporters.
Is this the first time that you're actually kind of reflecting on your role within this party? I mean, this has been going on for a number of months now. There's been tensions in Canada, rising anti-Semitism. You've seen your government struggle to sometimes or come up with a position that satisfies everybody, and you've kind of been at the forefront of this. But is this the first time you're actually kind of reflecting on your future here?
I think it's the first time in my parliamentary career that I've had a reflection like this, where I truly felt last night that a line had been crossed when my party members got up and cheered and gave a standing ovation to Heather McPherson and the NDP. I started reflecting as to whether or not I belonged. And I will let you know further how I feel over the coming days. For the moment, I'm still there.
So you could kind of feel that quiver in his voice. Here's the update. Housefather says that after a significant and serious amount of reflection, after sitting down with the Prime Minister, addressing his concerns around anti-Semitism in Canada, he's decided that his most effective role is as a Liberal MP representing his constituents in Montreal. Evan Scrimshaw's written about it. The headline, Housefather's Effective Progressivism, at Scrimshaw Unscripted. What do you make of this story?
I think Housefather... I think the best thing you can say about Housefather is that he took his time. He was obviously emotional when that vote happened. He was obviously, I think, hurt by what the Liberals did. And, he took nearly 2 weeks from that vote to putting out the statement. It was 11 days. And he realized that he could be functionally ineffective backbencher, waiting out his tenure to lose because it's Mount Royal, and I'm sorry, a Liberal's going to win Mount Royal. The joke used to be that you could run a pig in Mount Royal and they would win the seat anyway.
It's kind of like running a lawn sign in Alberta as a Conservative. Same deal.
Correct, exactly. So Housefather had a choice. He could either go out in a self-righteous blaze of glory, or he could extract meaningful concessions from the Prime Minister. He met with Trudeau, I think, multiple times last week, according to a statement. They hashed out a agenda for Housefather to work with the special envoy against anti-Semitism, or I'm sorry if I have the title wrong. But they're going to work on a serious agenda fighting anti-Semitism, and that is a substantially better outcome than Housefather either crossing the floor to the Conservatives, becoming an independent, waiting 18 months, and just losing all of that influence, all of that ability to actually help the Jewish community in Canada, who obviously have been under immense and horrific attack for something that, whatever you think about the Israeli government, whatever you think about Netanyahu, Jews in Montreal and Toronto who are having bullets shot through the doors of synagogues and Jewish day schools and Molotov cocktails thrown in windows did absolutely have nothing to do with it. And so if Anthony Housefather can use his hurt and his anger to an effective means and can help, stem this heinous tide of anti-Semitism, then it will be a damn good bit of work from him.
Yeah, there's some people in the chat saying, well, he's just doing this, to protect his seat. And well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of why politicians do anything. And I guess the bet is, like you alluded to, that the seat's not going to swing in the next federal election. But did you, for even a serious moment, think that Anthony Housefather would cross the floor to the Conservatives? I don't.
I didn't. I never bought it, because if Housefather were to do that, he'd plainly be a stupider person than I thought he is. Like I've always thought a lot of it. I thought a lot of Housefather. I don't always agree with him. I haven't agreed with everything he said since that vote came up, but I totally understand he's a Jewish MP from either the most or second most heavily Jewish riding in the country. He's a smart guy, and so I didn't think he would, do something as stupid as crossing the floor, costing himself all of this influence, and giving Poilievre this massive win when he has a much more direct route to achieving meaningful policy wins for the Jewish community in Mount Royal and across Canada more broadly.
Justin says politics these days is effectively a popularity contest, and I don't particularly like any of the personalities that our system is currently attracting. Yeah, we had an interesting conversation yesterday with the mayor of Souyuz, talking about the abuse and the harassment that politicians are seeing there at every level of government, and what that's doing, chasing away the types of people you want in politics, and maybe attracting or drawing in or retaining I guess the people that are happy to have a slugfest in the trenches. And for some people, that's what politics should be. In some countries and in some traditions, that's what politics has always been, or has been for quite some time. But we're not as used to it here, right? If you look at Canada and the United States, I mean, there's always been adversarial messaging. There's always been that animosity. But there is a bit of a vibe, isn't there? And people oftentimes point to Donald Trump as the one that sort of paved the way for this. I'm not sure. I think he probably he probably saw an opportunity and made the most of it, as he has done through his career. I don't know if he's the one to point the finger at, but he's probably the highest profile offender.
I think people who act like Trump is the cause of all this, as opposed to just being a manifestation of a system that was increasingly sort of the sort of niceties and civility of the system is collapsing. I mean, George Bush, swift boated John Kerry by questioning his military service in 2004. Let's not act like Donald Trump was the first person to say heinous things. He just was more willing to say it in a way that normal people speak, right? As opposed to the sort of polite knifings of, the 90s. I mean, hell, the political scandal when I was born in 1997, was, whether or not Bill Clinton had sexual relations with a woman. The concept that, things were all nice and dandy until Donald Trump is ludicrous. But the thing in Canadian politics is that it is getting worse, because there's this sense that there's no real danger, there's no real problem, there's no real penalty for being extreme and frankly just saying ludicrous things, right? There's a sense that you can get away with basically everything short of murder, and as long as your partisans are happy, you're fine. And I think that's a incorrect assumption. I do actually think there's a price to be paid. And I mean, Aaron O'Toole and Andrew Scheer both lost elections against weak, theoretically vulnerable liberal campaigns, because they weren't where the majority of Canadians, were on key issues. And I think, if people want to make politics more about the issues, I think we have to be happy that we don't have ineffectual grandstanding, like what Housefather theoretically could have done. And we have people who are more willing to commit to actual solutions to problems, as opposed to ineffectual grandstanding on CBC and CTV.
Well, so you write about what you call Housefather's effective progressivism, and you stack up his story, or his story over the past few weeks anyway, with a situation involving Rachel Gilmore, former Global News journalist, a news personality certainly in Canada, who's been on this show before. And you kind of stack these two scenarios up against each other. And so I want to dig into this because it's an interesting one. People should read your full piece. We don't have the time to get into all of it. Again, we'll have the link in the show notes here. But you essentially, you take a look at Rachel Gilmore cynically congratulating, and we talked about this on the show, Pierre Poilievre for securing what she calls the coveted Alex Jones endorsement. Everybody knows Alex Jones, probably America's most prominent conspiracy theorist, the Sandy Hook shooting denier. And so here you can see the tweet. Alex Jones had said, I've been following this guy, Pierre Poilievre, for years. He's the real deal. Canada desperately needs more leaders like him. So does the rest of the world. Rachel Gilmore writes, it can't have been easy to dog whistle conspiracy theories often enough to clinch the support of a Sandy Hook shooting denier. But my God, Poilievre did. But then she kind of goes a step further and she posts an email that she sent to Pierre Poilievre's press secretary. She says, I've asked Poilievre's team for comment on this. No reply as of yet. She says, I'll update you when they definitely respond because they totally don't ignore journalists 90% of the time while fundraising off the likes of David Menzies from Rebel News. Why do you have such an issue with what Rachel Gilmore is doing there, and why was it relevant to include in your Anthony Housefather commentary?
Because Rachel Gilmore asked the question that was never going to get an answer so that she could boast on Twitter about how mean Pierre Poilievre's staff is to her. It's not about getting an answer. It's not about finding something out. It's not about getting a comment. It's about getting a bunch of likes and retweets on Twitter from people who already agree with her. And I don't find that kind of showboating progressivism to be useful. I don't find that to be a valuable use of resources and time. And if you have a platform, you have an obligation to effective activism or to effective whatever you're trying to do. I don't know if she would call her Twitter account activism, but I mean, it certainly seems like it. And I think that progressives do not hold progressives to account enough. We don't hold our own accountable when they are doing things that are counterproductive. And I'm sorry, that question
progressives
not
don't hold
question.
not until they decide to cannibalize them. Nobody cannibalizes their own more than progressives in Canada.
But the thing is that I had people, because I tweeted about it a few days before I ended up writing the column, and I had people being like, oh, that was a tough question. No, I have watched you rip to shreds politicians of every stripe, of every political persuasion. You can ask a tough question. That's not a tough question. That's an act of self-love, right? That's a verbal or written act of self-love. That's not about getting an answer. That's not about tying Pierre Poilievre to the cross. That's about you getting a bunch of likes and retweets. And I've done it before. I have posted, the way I covered the 2020 election in a previous life was really bad. And I said a lot of things to make progressives feel good, to boost a following, to gain a profile. I've done it before, and it's not good.
What's one specific thing that you would take back? Is there one off the top of your head?
I would be I would have been a substantially less arrogant to the possibility that Biden was not just not going to necessarily win, but I predicted a big Biden landslide in 2020, and turned out it wasn't. And I had just completely dismissed all evidence and anybody who said, are you sure it's going to be that big? I just dismissed them as idiots or, assholes. And I was an asshole, and I'm not going to pretend I wasn't. But telling progressives what they want can be a very lucrative business. It can get you a big following. It can get you opportunities. I am living evidence that it can, because I don't understand why I have the following I do. I'm grateful for it, but we need to hold people to account because, it's a running joke at this point, but a fellow friend of the show, Max Fawcett, and I joke about this all the time, but him and I were screaming for months, for me over a year, for Rachel Notley to get to change that campaign. And I wrote column after column. That's why I came on the show originally. That's why you invited me on the first time.
Yeah,
was to talk about my anti-Rachel Notley, please God, do something better.
She didn't like that, by the way. Now, I talked with Rachel directly about you, by the way, FYI.
Oh wow.
Yeah, she didn't like the interview.
Well, I'm just gonna say, well, frankly, it would have been nice if she would have maybe listened, and if she would have taken what I had said.
Well,
or
they
what
definitely
Max had said.
listened. Yeah, they definitely.
Well, here's
listened.
the thing. Then they should have listened to the criticism, because here's the thing. There are a lot of bad things happening in Alberta these days. I think Danielle Smith's running a really bad government, and it would have been nice if the NDP had listened to either me or Max Fawcett or literally any of the other people who were screaming for them to run a better campaign before it happened, so that we don't have a government that is as focused on nonsense, that can't get a health service going. It's a serious fault, and I would like progressives to start holding people to account before failure, so that we can avoid failure, as opposed to then just cannibalizing our own after the damage is all done.
Okay, because you're talking about in particular holding fellow or other progressives to account, right? Because people are saying right now, like James, for example, says call people to account. That's literally what Rachel Gilmore is doing there. You're talking though about progressives calling progressives to account, correct? Right?
Right.
I mean, Peaches here. Let me read some of this. We got the smartest live chat in the country. You know that. Peaches says, I'm sorry, Jespo, media everywhere has to take a little responsibility for the division on the left-right bullshit. The media platform should be for information, not activism. I agree with Peaches on one take. I do think media needs to take responsibility. I think cable news is a big one, is a big offender in the U.S. I think in Canada. I mean, you look at every platform. Look at our platform. Like shows that have a host with an opinion, like a talk show as opposed to a news broadcast. Number one, there's different. But number two, I think maybe the lines have become blurred, where people right now are saying, like Sharon, for example, happy birthday, Sharon, says, wait, whatever happened to non-biased journalism when you could just get the facts and the quotes and not kind of the slant of the reporter? And there are journalists that are out there that are producing good, non-biased, fact-check journalism, but there's a lot of opinion out there. There's a lot of platforms like ours, like yours, Evan, where people can say what they think, where we can tear a strip off someone, where we can call somebody out. Now, is that objective? I try to approach everything objectively. Is it non-biased? Absolutely not, because there's not a human being on earth that is non-biased. That doesn't make sense. That interferes and conflicts with the inherent nature of what being human is, which is having experiences that shape your perspective, that's having feelings and convictions and a moral code and leanings and inclinations and all of the other things. We are all biased, but good objective journalism sets that bias aside. It doesn't present that bias. Where talk shows like this, columns, Substacks like yours, Evan, I don't pretend. Someone will say to me, Jesperson, you're biased. Yeah, duh. So are you reaching out to me, calling me biased. Your bias is recognizing and calling out my bias. We're all biased. But what does this mean when it comes back to the division that Peaches is talking about and the role that media, or the responsibility that media has to take in maybe fueling some of that? People are right here. They're saying, listen, if you want to build subscribers, those likes, those shares, those retweets, they are important. Why do you think we ask people to leave comments on our stuff, to like our stuff, to share, to subscribe? Because we're trying to grow the show. That's obvious. Would I rather have 1 million subscribers on YouTube than 15,000? Absolutely. Would I sell my soul to get 1 million? Nah, or otherwise I already would have done it.
Right. And so I think your points about bias are entirely true. And I think about this in the context of politics. I also think about it in the context of sports, right? My writing style is heavily influenced by Bill Simmons, who is, for people who don't know,
brilliant,
the most biased Boston homer of a sports fan you've ever met. But he is one of the few people in sports media. He was one of the innovators of admit your bias, come from the point of your bias, and don't pretend that you're some unbiased, objective analyst when you're not. That's why I'm upfront and honest about the fact that I'm like a lefty hack, because I don't want people to think that what I am doing is unbiased. I'm not. I'm incredibly biased. I think that I'm still being honest. I think that my goal is to still tell it like it is, to criticize people who I should quote unquote agree with when I think they're wrong, when I think they're doing the wrong thing. I've written some of the most mean things that have been said about Jagmeet Singh have come from me, someone who voted for his party at the last election. I think that's an incredibly valuable thing. I think the issue is people who claim an unbiased nature and an unbiased stature, who are obviously doing bias, right? I think the sort of the pretense of news that is actually biased, that is actually just opinion, is the problem. And if we want to have a more mature, honest politics, that starts with having a more mature, honest conversation about the nature of bias, the nature of all of our biases, and coming at it with the perspective of, yes, I am more left wing than plenty of people. And that's the viewpoint I'm coming at this with, as opposed to pretending I'm some middle of the road centrist. And then it turns out that, I hold all these left wing views, but I'm pretending, I'm lying to people and pretending that actually I'm this, dead center, no, I'm a partisan. I've held a liberal membership. I shilled plenty on my Substack for one candidate in the last Ontario Liberal leadership race. Like, being open about your biases, your perspectives is what's going to make people have more faith in media institutions, and pretending that everything is down the middle and when it's not, it's lying to people, and people are too smart to be lied to anymore.
I like this from Garth, who says, we're all biased, but honesty is key. If a journalist is going to ditch honest journalism for activism and pretend like they're giving facts, then that's toxic. I don't disagree, Garth. But at the same time, if we're talking about journalists like from legitimate outlets, then there's got to be checks and balances in place where that's not happening. If you're talking about independents like us, then I think you have to take each one for what it's worth and understand more about it. I mean, this tees up nicely your column on Naheed Nenshi. You wrote it about a month ago. It stopped me in my tracks when I saw it, Evan. I mean, you do declare your allegiance here. You say, I do not support Danielle Smith. I do want an NDP government in Alberta. You say, as a matter of fact, I think I saw you say, I want a progressive government in Alberta. I desperately want one. But then you say, and here's the thing, which is why I'm begging and pleading with the Alberta NDP membership to not hitch their wagon to the sinking ship that is Naheed Nenshi. You're the only person in Canada that I've seen refer to Naheed Nenshi as a sinking ship. The guy has doubled the membership of the party, just like Pierre Poilievre did for the federal Conservatives. His volunteer town halls have been packed to the rafters. He's drawing huge crowds. He prompted the withdrawal of the race from one of the big splashes, which was Raki Pancholi out of Edmonton Whitemud. What's with the hate toward Naheed? I mean, that's a loaded word to use, but why do you have no faith? Why is Naheed Nenshi a sinking ship?
Because his whole case is built on electability, but the thing is, I don't necessarily think. I think the best thing that ever happened to Naheed Nenshi was Main Street coming out with those twin polls in 2017 showing him down double digits, and then he wins and he looks like this amazing candidate who beat Bill Smith when he shouldn't have. He's this amazing candidate, and then he retires, goes quietly into the night, and he has this sort of halo effect around him. Well, Danielle Smith's a really good politician. She's a really good campaigner. I thought her 2023 campaign was mostly flawless. But more importantly, being popular within a party doesn't necessarily mean you're popular with the general electorate. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn got, tripled the size of the Labour membership in the UK. And at the last British election, he got he lost 60 seats. Like, internal popularity doesn't mean popularity with the country. His track record in 2010, he won the mayorship with 39% of the vote, which if the NDP gets 39% in Alberta or in Calgary, say goodbye to most of the people who just won their seats for the first time in 2023. But his political tendencies worked in Calgary when he was playing it essentially a lower stakes game. His political tendencies here aren't great. He came out very forcefully against Danielle Smith's trans rights legislation in a way that both exposed his political weakness, but also exposed that he doesn't really have a great grasp on these issues and where the public are on these issues. He came out much more forcefully against them than what the public is. Legere poll showed pretty good support for Smith's measures. He blasted them as un-Albertan, which is an overreaction and certainly not where the public are. His position on climate change he's taken about 17,000 of them in the last 15 years. What's his position going to be going into the next election? I don't know. No one really knows. And more importantly, his ability to work with the team has been under question from people from his time working with the Calgary City Council. He's a divisive figure who doesn't have a lot of upside to change the party. And the reason I supported Raki was she was a fresh face who could put the party on a new trajectory without any of the baggage of the Notley era and could be a new kind of opposition, right? Well, Nenshi has all the baggage still. Everyone knows who he is, and he's still losing to the NDP. He doesn't to the UCP. He doesn't have a lot of upside because everyone knows who he is already. So he can't really like reframe himself. He can't really walk into the 2027 election as some new person. He has a mayoral record to defend that's up and down for sure. And frankly, I don't necessarily think he's some great electoral performer because, again, in 2017, he beat Bill Smith by like 7 points, which is a result that looks meh if you just look at the result and look at Bill Smith, but looks great because, oh, Main Street said he was going to lose by 17. He wins by 7. He's an electoral god. Well, if the poll was just wrong, and I respect the guys at Main Street, to be clear, I respect you to Maggie, but like if the polling's wrong and the polls were wrong the entire time, then like it's not that impressive of a result. And you need somebody who has the ability to get a really impressive result in Calgary if you're going to win this. And
so who's the better alternative? Who's the better option for the Alberta NDP?
So having said all that, Sarah Hoffman would be the absolute worst choice. And because frankly, there's 3 serious candidates left. Apologies to Gil McGowan and whatever. It's
Jody Calhoun Stonehouse is the other, yeah.
Yes, apologies. But it's Kathleen Ganley, it's Sarah Hoffman, and it's Nat Nenshi. I'm Team Ganley at this point. I think she has an ability to reframe the message. I think she is putting herself distinctly in an electability in a general election sense. I think the messaging is strong. I think starting with tax cuts and showing that you are open to that old PC tendency in Calgary, I think is going to be really important. And I think, frankly, she is a less known figure province-wide, which in some ways is a downside for her leadership prospects, but for a general election, less known gives her more time to reshape the party in her own sort of image, to reshape what it means to be an Alberta NDPer in a way that better allows that old PC coalition to come home to the NDP, to realize that actually the NDP are the home for centrist, fiscally conservative, socially liberal voters who don't think the oil industry is Satan, right? Which is the voters that they got some of in 2023, but they need to get more of if they want to get from, 39 seats to 44?
If you go with the oil industry is Satan approach, you're going to wallow in opposition or worse for the rest of your political career. I can guarantee that. I disagree with your take on Ganley. I don't think that it's a positive quality that barely anybody knows anything about you, so you have time to develop your own. I don't think that's a positive quality for the leader of a party that is teetering on forming government again and needs something to push it over the edge. A party that is saying goodbye to a compelling, dynamic, connected, reputable, likable leader to replace her with somebody relatively, and no offense to anybody, but to replace her with somebody that's soft-spoken and agreeable and kind of like, likable in kind of a nerdy way, talking about Star Trek. Like, that is not how you knock off Danielle Smith. That is not how you win a debate. That is not how you become the Premier of Alberta.
Can I make the counterpoint?
Please do.
Patrick Brown was polling at 45% consistently for like 2 years. He gets knifed as leader of the Progressive Conservatives in Ontario. Doug Ford comes in with a bigger name profile, whatever. He gets 40% in 2018.
Yeah.
And Patrick Brown was a nobody backbencher, 2-3 term federal backbencher before he ran for the leader. Like, I barely knew who he was, and I'm a political addict. Like, I do think blank slates, there is definitely a value to blank slates. I'm not saying you have to agree or disagree on Kathleen Ganley, but I do think there is a value to blank slates when you're facing a majority government, especially a majority government that, Danielle Smith has real vulnerabilities here. And the next election should be winnable for the NDP. I'm not saying they're going to win it, but it is a winnable election given the slate of issues that Danielle Smith is fighting on, be it, the health service, the oil, the energy transition, the state of the Alberta electricity grid at this point. et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, lots of road between now and the next provincial election in Alberta for sure. Lots to talk about there. Before we go, real quick, like in one sentence, is the Prime Minister going to stick with the carbon tax into the next election, or is he going to walk this thing back?
He's too committed to it. If he walks it back, you might as well just resign and just let Pierre Poilievre govern. He's pot committed at this point.
And anybody that follows you on Twitter knows you're big into the Masters. So am I. They're teeing off today. Obviously, Sunday is a day unlike any other for golf fans. Who will wear the green jacket in 2024? I'm
a biased hack, but Jordan Spieth gets the second.
Jordan Spieth. Okay, I like it. You can read Evan's work at scrimshawunscripted.substack.com. We encourage you to pledge your support to support independent journalism, independent political coverage like Evan's, and give him a follow on Twitter as well. Thanks for making yourself available, pal. It's always fun to go back and forth.
Thanks.
Yep, you got it. I saw somebody on the chat, I remember who it was, that said, "Oh, Sarah Hoffman's not going to like that." He didn't. I think Hoffman's got a real shot, I do think, and I know that some of you get critical when I say stuff like this, and sorry, not sorry, but that's what talk shows do. But some of you had said, well, you create this momentum, you create this narrative about favorites, which was a fair point in the chat. It actually made us think. And but it's obviously Nenshi's to lose. And one of you wrote in here, said the headline here is Smith versus Nenshi. That is, who is this? It was Jason who said, Albertans require an elaborate, or maybe I'll say skilled performer to lead them as premier. Nenshi versus Smith is the headline. I just think Nenshi's got that sort of dynamic nature to him. Now, these are all intangibles, though. This is all anecdotal stuff. But I always like to envision, people might say, debates matter, debates don't matter. Debates definitely matter. And I think that while Ganley and Hoffman would be capable there, I think that that's where Nenshi could really shine. And I think that would be an absolute – it would actually be – can I say this? And this is going to be offensive to any of you that are supporters of, like, the Alberta Party, rest in peace, the Alberta Liberals, rest in peace, any other party. I think it would be a shame if there was anybody else on that stage besides – the leaders of the UCP and the NDP. I want to see 100%. Back and forth, 1 versus 2, blue versus orange on that debate stage.
But it's got to be a little disappointing that, this next run, this next battle between Nenshi and Smith, you wish it was about the issues, but it's not. It's going to be about who can debate Danielle Smith better. And Nenshi's the best person for it. So, Ganley might have some issues that you align more with. And Hoffman, who is also a very good speaker, I will say. She was on the Discourse last week. Go check it out, thediscourse.com.
She was spitting fire on
She
here.
was, but Nenshi's the only one who is capable enough and quick enough to come back and hopefully, potentially, which Notley didn't do in her debate, call Danielle Smith out on some of the things people are calling lies, right to her face in the moment immediately, instead of saying, what did Rachel say in the debate that where she was like, I could go on about.
She goes, do you really want me to start talking about your candidates or something like that? And
we do.
Was like, yeah, no, you
start talking about all the things
that is
you
what
think
you should do.
She's wrong and lying about, right?
Yeah. So Cactus Sheriff says Hoffman does have a real shot at leadership, but it's a terrible outcome for the success of the party. I have mixed feelings talking about all this. Guy's heart on my sleeve. Sarah Hoffman's a good friend of mine. I like her a lot. She's been at my son's birthday party before. Sarah Hoffman is the type of person that I think is in politics for the right reason. Yeah. Now, whether or not that means that she's the best choice for leader of the NDP is an entirely different conversation. I'm just saying, from a personal angle, sometimes it feels weird for me to read some of these comments.
Of course.
Shit, she's going to hear me say this.
But look at Justin's comment there. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
What's he saying?
Right there, he says, I do want to see some actual policies and platforms from the NDP leadership candidates.
Yeah.
What do they want to do in the party aside from fight Smith?
Yeah.
And it's turned into is who can debate Smith better.
Yeah. We have seen some stuff on tax cuts. We've seen some stuff on reimagining the carbon tax, which was kind of interesting. As a matter of fact, we got an email from Wendy who wrote in out of Calgary. Shout out to Calgary today on carbon tax and changing behavior. This in response to our chat with Jen Gerson earlier this week on, April 9th, I guess it was. And so I want to get to Wendy's take. Plus, we've got some great emails, as mentioned, from Jim in Vernon and from AJ on transplants. And you really really need to hear this stuff. All of that's coming up in just a second, but let me remind you that these conversations on Real Talk do not happen without our incredible sponsors. The show wouldn't exist. And that includes our friends at Kubi Renewable Energy. They're hiring right now, and they want us to put a couple of things on your radar. If you're an electrician or an apprentice, if you're an expert in HR, if you're an office manager, a sales professional, Kubi's looking for you. Check out the careers link at kubienergy.ca. Help them grow clean energy in Canada. Don't forget as well, Positive Reflections presented by Kubi Renewable Energy, the first episode every week of Real Talk. If you see something in the world around you that makes you smile, that takes your mind off the news cycle for a second, we want to hear about it. Send us an email, talk@ryanjesperson.com, Positive Reflections in the subject line. Tell us the story. Send us the link. We love it when Real Talkers chime in on this, all presented by our friends at Kubi. Complete Care Restoration for more than 25 years across the province of Alberta has been restoring properties and rebuilding peace of mind. As a matter of fact, as we speak right now, team members of theirs are up in the northern Alberta regions most impacted by wildfires. We saw these gut punch stories last year, May, June, July, these entire communities. I mean, you saw entire streets and neighborhoods just taken down by Mother Nature. Fierce wildfire. And of course, at the end of the day, these are real people we're talking about. People's businesses, people's lives. You imagine starting from scratch? You need to be working with somebody you can trust, somebody who's going to be able to take your peace of mind into account. That's what Complete Care Restoration does better than anybody else. If disaster strikes in your neck of the woods, make sure you get in touch with Complete Care Restoration. Now, if shovels in the ground is a bit more of a positive situation for you and you're looking to more bring your outdoor space to life, if landscaping is going to be your big investment in 2024, we recommend with 2 thumbs up Eden Landscaping online at landscapeedmonton.ca. For more than 20 years, they've been earning referrals. They've been earning return business from clients that have trusted them to bring visions, to bring ideas to life. And they do it in a way that, man, oh man, I'll tell you, as a customer of theirs, my wife Carrie and I, every time we look into our backyard, we just go, yup. Turned out even better than we imagined. The ideas that their design team had and then their installers, how they brought it all together. I mean, it sounds boring to talk about, but even what they've done with our drainage, our yard used to flood every spring. We've got big dogs. How do you think that works out? A big mud pit every spring. Not anymore. The drainage is fixed thanks to Eden Landscaping. Get them on your project today at landscapeedmonton.ca. So we talked to Jen Gerson. You know her from obviously a number of different publications she's written for, but most recently, Jen, of course, has her own Substack with Matt Gurney. This is where a lot of the high-profile print journalists are going, right? Are you noticing this trend? Paul Wells has a Substack. I mean, who doesn't have a Substack these days, it seems? It's ways that journalists are extending their careers, building their own audiences. And we talked to Jen a little bit about that off the top of the interview. I recommend you check it out. It was like the first 75-minute interview that we've done in a long time.
That was a long one.
I asked Jen for 20 minutes, and it just kind of kept going and going. And anyway, I really recommend that April 9th episode of Real Talk, whether you agree with her or not. That's never a prerequisite, I hope, for enjoying an interview that we do. This, though, what Johnny's about to play for us was the moment, I think, where she got everybody's attention. We're talking about the carbon tax. We're talking about climate action. We're talking about straw bans and plastic bag bans and 15-cent surcharges on takeout paper bags and all those types of things. And then Jen starts musing around whether or not technology could save us.
To what extent is climate emissions going to lead to an apocalyptic existential collapse of human society? I think that's we're talking a long ways out here, man. And at that
we
point,
won't be around.
We won't be around. But also, I mean, I don't rule out the possibility of significant technological advancement taking us to a better place. It's
different
we're not going to have the
planet.
climate. Well, no, but no, I'm not talking about different planet at all. I'm saying, like, I think there's a very good chance that technological advancement in the next 100 years, with a combination of, nuclear power and renewables and, better transportation networks and different kind of heating approaches, these are all soluble problems. And I think that we probably will develop the technology to solve and implement them in the next 100 years. I don't think that we're all going to be wandering around like some kind of Mad Maxian hellscape. Nor do I think it's reasonable to be terrifying the hell, especially out of young people, into thinking that, because that's going to lead them into behaviors that are counterproductive.
I think she was getting a little frustrated with us.
I did. As I watch it back, I'm like, were we kind of beaking her in the background? We were just trying to add to it.
We weren't trying to be frat boys, but I was like, yeah, another planet. We go live somewhere else.
Yeah,
anyway,
we won't be around.
Wendy was a little more serious in her response to this. She wrote in, talk@ryanjesperson.com, says, I'm a big fan of the show, listen to the podcast often. Thank you, Wendy. Says, I wanted to comment on the discussion you had with Jen Gerson, April 9th, about the carbon tax and changing behavior. Wendy says, I'm a senior living in the inner city of Calgary. I recently gave up my older car because repairs were too expensive, and so I decided to go carless. She says, I get a senior's bus pass, and now I'm walking everywhere or taking public transit. Love it. She says, I've been living in Calgary my entire life, and I refused to take public transit because I thought it was inconvenient and impractical. I've now been using it for 5 months, and I have to say, get this, Johnny, she says, I love it. She says, I can get to most places in the city quickly and easily. I can relax. I don't worry about getting stuck in rush hour, which in Calgary is any time of day. No kidding, Calgary. You got to figure out Deerfoot. She says, or trying to find parking and paying outrageous fees. She says, Ryan, you'd be surprised at the pushback I get for going carless. I wouldn't be surprised, actually, Wendy, because we hear it all the time. She says, almost daily I get asked, Wendy, when are you going to buy a car? And every time I tell them that I don't want to own a car and I actually am enjoying public transit, and the next response is, oh no, you must get another car. You can't get around a car city like Calgary without one. And then she says the unsolicited advice continues. People tell me they could never be without a car. In many circumstances, maybe that's true. But making lifestyle changes like mine involves a change in mindset. Now, if you're convinced that you can never make changes, you won't. And I see so many people put roadblocks in their own way instead of changing behavior that could be better for the environment, like going carless or driving less or going down to one car instead of two, or walking or biking to the convenience store for milk or to the park with your kids. Wendy says transportation is one of the top 3 carbon emitters in the country, and it's the easiest one to solve. I know not everybody can go carless, okay? She says, but we can put pressure on governments to better invest in more efficient public transport and to provide incentives such as low or no-cost transit fares to encourage more people to take the train or the bus. She says, honestly, and I think my fellow Real Talker says Wendy would be interested to hear that I actually feel way less stressed now that I don't have to worry about gas prices going up again or worry about the cost about the next unexpected car repair. Wendy says lifestyle change is not easy, but it's made more difficult when we put those hurdles in our own way or refuse to consider alternatives and simply say, I could never do that. Instead, Real Talkers need to ask themselves, why not? That from Wendy in Calgary.
Great email. Yeah, the bus is a great play. Took it today, and now that the snow's gone, I don't know if it's good or bad, Ryan, but I got here.
But you've started
7:15, so I got
public transit. What, couple of times a week type thing?
Yeah, some weeks it's 100%. I'm going here and back on public transit. So and all the things I see on, I won't name the Instagram accounts about violence and drugs and being fearful on the trains and buses. I mean, I'm sure it happens in any large city, urban metropolis, but I've only ever seen that one incident where, someone was asleep on the train and literally at the next stop, some EMS and police officers got him off. He had no shoes. They were going to get him a pair of shoes and then a transfer. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I don't know. There's a lot of fearful stuff online, but yeah, the bus is easy. It's quicker, especially in the winter.
Yeah.
With the bumper to bumper traffic coming from the south side.
Well, I like
it's much more efficient. So
she didn't even touch on the safety stuff, which is another. I mean, she does reference roadblocks and hurdles. For a lot of people, that's a very real
100%.
hurdle. You hear about. I mean, in our home city of Edmonton. I mean, there's a story in the headlines this week as we're talking about this. 14-year-olds arrested for beating someone with a baton and pushing someone down the stairs at a transit station. There's like stabbing. I mean, so I'm going to be honest, cards on the table, not to take away from what Wendy just wrote, but like, I'm not taking my 8-year-old boy on public transit. Not a chance. I took him to the mall on the bus once because he wanted to ride it, and actually it was great, and we had a great time. But I'm just not. Because I don't want to get stabbed and pushed downstairs or get in a fight.
I'm saying I don't think that happens as much as it's being.
But it is happening.
Promoted online.
You're probably right.
Because someone who's been taking it 6 months now, I've only seen one incident. ever.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll see people that you might not necessarily agree how they're living, but I see kids on there all the time. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but like, talk to someone who lives in New York and show them some of our videos and be like, hey, you guys got it easy. You know what I mean? Not that stuff is good and we shouldn't try to prevent it, but it's going to happen in any major city with 1 million people.
Yeah. People can check out our January 15th episode of Real Talk. That's when we talked to Sarah Bisbee.
What a good show.
We released it as a highlight as well. The headline, "No minivan, no problem for this family of 6. Sarah talked to us about, family of 6, 4 kids living in the suburbs, and they've gone car free, which is, something, to be honest.
This is next level.
When Wendy writes in about hurdles and people problem solving, I was so impressed with her. And then you remember what happened like a couple days after she was on our show. Somebody like terribly vandalized her bike, and she posted photos. It was just a real kick in the teeth. But that was a great interview. I really enjoyed that. That was January 15th, if you want to check that out on Real Talk. And thanks to Wendy for writing in. We sure appreciate it. We also talked about organ donation. We've been talking about it this week because I am proud to be participating in, supporting an event coming up on Saturday, April 20th. I'm hoping to see Real Talkers out there at an evening of hope. Details on that in just a second. In memory of Andy Polanski, who died tragically in an auto accident, but was able to save the lives of 5 other people because he was an organ donor. Hearing that story, Jim wrote in from Vernon, BC, to comment on something that you said in passing yesterday. No, it's a good thing, Johnny. And I feel like sometimes you think I'm just going to tee you up to get smacked down.
No, I don't think
I would at least give you the heads up on that. But you said something really good. And we were talking about cancer rates yesterday. Anyway, so Jim writes in and says, just another incidental comment made in passing during your show, Jespo, April 10th, as you discussed transplants and community health, and the issue of rising cancer rates was mentioned by Johnny with a question as to why. And we love when audience members do this and suggest guests, suggest subject matter. Honestly, you guys, for real, it does go a long way. We have a literal, actual working list of ideas and roundtable subjects, and we love when you do what Jim does. He says, perhaps a discussion with reputable medical personnel about the effects of chemicals in the environment, herbicides, pesticides, biocides, I don't even know what those are, industrial waste, plastic nanoparticles, discarded prescription drugs, might well explain the increase in cancer, maybe accompanied with various different radiations in modern society. Jim says, I know that Johnny's comment was just like a small part of a much larger discussion, but given Alberta and Canada's current politicized health concerns, this might be worth looking into. That from Jim and Vernon, and I love it.
I do. I want to have a show about, kind of why these rates are on the rise, and also the thing I talked about yesterday, which is a silver lining, but not that great of one, that survival rates are also up because of science and all the stuff we're doing to help with cancer research and treatment. But it's just, we were talking about it the other day, like why it must be all these compounding factors, right? We're on our phones, the soil, the food is being grown differently now and in cheaper, better way. Well, some will say better because it's cheaper, but in quicker, faster ways because the population increase and everything. I just want to get someone in who can put it all in a bucket and pour it on my head.
100%. Gilles is letting us know in the chat. He says he's off to class. Gilles, have a great day in class. Says, I would love to talk about transit more. We need to change perceptions about alternative transportation if we don't want our cities to have 2-hour commutes, including Edmonton starting to look like Greater Toronto. Fair enough and fair point. People are talking about how bus route redesigns are a disaster. Other people talking about stigma around transit. Some of you talking about the fact that you live in rural areas and suggesting that your taxes are paying for transit. Fair enough. I mean, I could go off on that obviously as well. I think, visitors to cities come in and take advantage. That's not a bad thing. When I say take advantage, I just mean you enjoy, the results of what a lot of those urban taxpayers are covering. I don't know that it's productive to get into fights over like who's paying for what in what jurisdictions. But of course, Alberta politicians have been making hay on that for a long time. I went off on that yesterday about Danielle Smith's fight with Ottawa now saying she's going to take Justin Trudeau to court because the provincial government, Alberta, wants all federal money to flow through the Alberta legislature. They don't want any collaboration. They don't want any deals between the municipalities and the feds.
Now. What about when Pierre's in there?
Yeah.
This is all going to change.
Yeah,
I love talking about this because you know as well as I do. As soon as, like our last guest was saying, if the inevitable happens and a conservative government comes into power, there's not going to be a lot of ammo in that gun that Danielle uses, you know?
Well, we'll see. I mean, you got to look back to what were the relationships like, for example, with conservative governments in BC. Christy Clark, I think of Ralph Klein. I can name 100, examples. Obviously, in Alberta, you had 10 straight premiers, obviously, that were conservative. But you look under conservative federal governments and conservative provincial governments, what was that relationship like? Was Alberta high on the hog and getting its fair share? People have short memories, right? You don't look back and say, if the premise of the gripe is that Alberta has never been treated fairly, what does that say about conservative prime ministers? But I digress. I want to get to this email about transplants and set up there by Jim and Vernon. This from AJ, who writes in and says, I've been meaning to send you a note for the last week. Have you noticed how many more emails we're getting? There's something happening right now.
Yeah,
subscribers are up, chat's more lively. We're getting more emails. We appreciate it. It's growing. Can you feel it, everybody? Can you feel the ground moving a little bit in a good way? AJ says, but when I heard you read that email from Leslie on April 10th about Spencer and Kevin, I knew I needed to share. AJ says, a few weeks ago, I made brief mention. I wrote in and I made brief mention that I've spent my entire adult life reliant on our medical system. I remember that, AJ. Says, I will continue to, as a recipient of 2 kidney transplants. He says, at 18, I was diagnosed with end-stage kidney failure. Can you imagine that, 18 years old? Says, very soon after that, I was put on the transplant list. And just a week after my 21st birthday, I received a call on a beautiful Sunday morning, probably no more beautiful morning than this. Hey, AJ says that they had a match and that we had to make our way to the University Hospital. And on July 19th of 2004, I received a transplant. Due to a donor-specific antibody, we knew that the kidney likely only had a lifespan of about 15 years. Sure enough, 17 years later, I started to really feel the effect of kidney failure again. In 2022, I started dialysis, and then again, I went back on that transplant list. Being a second transplant classified as highly sensitized, I also knew that getting a match was going to be a lot more difficult, and I expected to be waiting years to receive that second transplant. But I just got chills right now. That's me talking, Jesperson. AJ says, in September 2023, I got that call again, and I am now carrying on with a very healthy kidney that's performing very well. Amazing. He says, I think we've all heard and most have seen firsthand the challenges of living with illness, whether that be organ failure or cancer or infection. He says it could be the many other things that, we've got to tackle in life. Organ, tissue, blood, plasma, bone marrow, breast milk, stem cells from umbilical cord blood can be donated and can make a huge difference in people's lives. AJ says, just 3 months after my first transplant, I got married, and we're going to celebrate 20 years this fall. In 2007, we welcomed our first daughter. In 2009, our second. And thank you to that donation, I've been able to live out my 20s and 30s, enjoying life like most people, like most healthy people do, instead of planning life around dialysis exchange. Now with the second transplant, which I received on my daughter's 16th birthday, this guy's trying to make me cry. And as I go into my 40s, I'll be able to continue to be there with my kids as they finish up their high school days, move on to post-secondary if they choose, and become young adults. My doctor tells me that this kidney is a near perfect match, so I'm hopeful that this one will continue to serve me for decades to come so I can be there full time for my kids and family. AJ says I could go on and share more about living with kidney disease, living post-transplant, but more importantly, the message needs to be shared not just with Real Talkers, but with everybody. Please, this is all in bold, please take a moment to register as an organ donor. Please tell your family that this is your wish. You may be hearing this and saying to yourself, I'll get around to it, but like many other things in our lives, getting around to it sometimes doesn't happen. I'm thinking about Logan Boulay on that bus, the Humboldt Broncos. Mm-hmm. He says if people want to register as an organ donor, they can do so online with Alberta Health Services or through their own provincial jurisdiction, or they can go to a motor vehicle registry, even if you have signed the back of your health card. AJ says take care of each other. And thanks to you and Johnny for what you guys do every single day. That's from AJ. That's an amazing email. I love awesome. That. Yeah. A transplant on his daughter's 16th birthday.
It's absolutely
How
incredible.
amazing is that? So this brings me to Saturday, April 20th. I'm really proud to be participating in an Evening of Hope. This is presented by the Andy Polanski Charitable Foundation. And Real Talkers, I would love for you to show up en masse for this. It's a gala fundraiser. It's the first one ever. And they are pulling out all the stops at the Fort Saskatchewan Community Hall, We're going to have so much fun. This is in honor of Andy Polansky, a beloved community member known for his infectious laugh, his deep passion for sports. Andy's life was cut short in a motor vehicle accident, tragically, but Andy became an organ and tissue donor in May of 2013, saving the lives of 5 people in the Edmonton area. The Evening of Hope, coming up on the 20th, will feature The Long Run. That's Canada's salute to the Eagles, featuring all of their top hits. We're going to have so much fun with them. I'm going to be acting as auctioneer, Johnny, for the live. Oh, it's going to be so much fun.
Your second forte.
I got to do some work on my live auction skills, but all of this is for a wonderful cause, and they've got some great auction items which you'll be able to check out ahead of time. For more information about An Evening of Hope, I encourage you to check out the Andy Polansky Charitable Foundation online. It's really simple, apcf.ca. That's Andy Polansky Charitable Foundation, apcf.ca, or you can check out the show notes. We'll have the link there. You can always hit me up on Twitter, Instagram as well, or shoot a note to our TikTok at Real Talk RJ. That's another way to get in touch with the show. Coming up tomorrow, coming up on Friday, I'm looking forward to this Real Talk Roundtable because we're going to ask a question that has been asked many times before in Canada to mixed results. When Preston Manning started asking his friends about it in the late 1980s into the early 1990s, it turned into something pretty significant, the Reform Party. And then people started wondering if having more than one federal Conservative Party was a problem. And so Stephen Harper and Peter MacKay figured it out and came together and then ultimately formed government. And now some Conservatives are starting to ask that question again for different reasons. Do they need to swing back to the middle? Is there room for a progressive Conservative Party in Canada? They're going ahead. They're starting it. And we're going to talk to the founders on Friday's Real Talk.
Real Talk is hosted by